World War and Second World War alongside British troops. When my parents and their generation arrived in this country under the Nationality Act of 1948, they arrived here as British citizens. It is inhumane and cruel for so many of that Windrush generation to have suffered so long in this condition, and for the Secretary of
The two-person deportation theatre, Britain's immigration policy under the microscope. Right then, before we dive into today's rather remarkable display of political theatre, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, after what we're about to unpack regarding Britain's latest immigration spectacular, you'll want to stay informed about the ongoing circus that is Westminster politics. Two people. Two. Let that sink in for a moment as we examine what the government is heralding as a breakthrough in immigration policy. David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, stood before the cameras with a kind of confidence typically reserved for announcing the end of a world war, declaring that Britain's deportation of exactly 2 asylum seekers represents an immediate deterrent to Channel crossings. Meanwhile, as he spoke those very words, hundreds of migrants were already boarding dinghies in northern France, preparing for yet another perilous journey across 21 miles of churning water. The sheer audacity of the timing would be comedic if it weren't so tragically emblematic of everything wrong with Britain's approach to immigration policy. Picture this scene. At precisely 6:15 a.m., an Eritrean man boards a flight from Heathrow to Paris, becoming the second deportee under this much-vaunted one-in, one-out agreement with France. Simultaneously, somewhere near Calais, dozens of people are wading through waist-deep water toward overcrowded inflatable boats, including children with armbands and flotation devices, preparing to risk everything for a chance at British shores. This is a reality check that our political establishment seems determined to ignore. While Lammy celebrates a 14% increase in returns and speaks grandly of breaking paradigms and cracking down on gangs, the fundamental equation remains unchanged. For every person we deport with great fanfare, dozens more arrive under cover of darkness. It's rather like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon while the taps remain fully open. The government's rhetoric around this policy reveals something quite telling about the state of British political discourse. Listen to how they frame the narrative. This isn't just policy implementation, it's performance art. The timing of announcements, the carefully chosen language about immediate deterrence, the emphasis on numbers that sound impressive until you place them in proper context. It all suggests a government more concerned with managing headlines and managing borders. But let's examine what this breakthrough actually represents in practice. The UK-France returns agreement allows Britain to send back asylum seekers who have passed through France to claim asylum there instead. On paper, this sounds reasonable enough. In reality, we've managed to implement this oath-shattering policy change by successfully deporting 2 individuals. 2 people in a crisis involving thousands upon thousands of crossings annually. The mathematical absurdity is staggering. Meanwhile, the scenes playing out on French beaches tell a rather different story. At 5:30 a.m. on the very day Lammy was proclaiming success, 40 young men emerged from a quiet side street in Gravelines, carrying an inflatable boat above their heads like some grim ceremonial procession. They threw it into a canal as police officers watched, forming human chains to help pull people from the mud when their initial launch attempt failed. These are not the actions of people deterred by the prospect that they might be among the chosen 2 sent back to France. The opposition's response has been predictably theatrical, though not without merit. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, branded the government celebration pathetic and absurd, pointing out that boasting about removing just 2 people while hundreds cross daily is rather like celebrating the rearrangement of deck chairs on the Titanic. His criticism, while politically motivated, does highlight the fundamental disconnect between government rhetoric and mathematical reality. But here's where the story becomes genuinely concerning for anyone who values serious governance. The government's response to criticism hasn't been to acknowledge the scale of the challenge or propose proportionate solutions. Instead, we've witnessed a fascinating exercise in political deflection. When questioned about adopting more robust measures, possibly involving military intervention as suggested by certain American political figures, we get carefully worded non-answers about the border force being strengthened and the Navy having new powers. Peter Kyle, the business secretary, performed an admirable diplomatic dance when asked about military involvement, essentially saying that while the military could be called upon if necessary, they are rather too busy with that minor matter defending the realm to worry about immigration enforcement. It's a sensible position, but one that exposes a government's lack of practical alternatives to their current approach of celebrating minuscule deportation numbers. The deeper issue here isn't just about immigration policy, it's about the quality of political discourse in modern Britain. We've reached a point where serious policy challenges are met with theatrical gestures rather than substantive solutions. The government appears to believe that if they announce their achievements loudly enough and frequently enough, the public won't notice that the achievements themselves are almost comically inadequate to the scale of the problem they are meant to address. Consider the resources involved in this grand gesture: the administrative effort, the legal proceedings, the coordination with French authorities, the flights, the security arrangements, all to move two people from Britain to France. Meanwhile, the estimated cost of the ongoing crisis runs into billions annually. The return on investment, if we may use such crude commercial terms for human lives, is virtually non-existent. The Tories and Reform have seized upon this obvious disconnect to call for withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights, a proposal that would fundamentally alter Britain's relationship with international law and European institutions. Even some Labour figures, including former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, have suggested that easing the impact of international agreements might help reduce illegal migration. These are not fringe voices. These are serious political figures acknowledging that our current approach is manifestly inadequate. But here's what makes this entire spectacle so profoundly British in its absurdity. The government genuinely seems to believe that incremental tinkering with existing systems will somehow produce transformational results. It's the same mentality that gives us railway timetable adjustments presented as transport revolutions and ministerial reshuffles described as radical government overhauls. We've become a nation that mistakes motion for progress and confuses activity with achievement. The human cost of this political theater is significant and largely ignored in Westminster discussions. Every day this crisis continues. People die in the Channel. Families are separated. Legitimate asylum seekers are trapped in systems that cannot process their claims efficiently. Meanwhile, criminal gangs profit enormously from the chaos, expanding their operations and developing increasingly sophisticated methods to circumvent whatever limited enforcement measures we do implement. The economic implications are equally serious. The cost of emergency accommodation, processing claims, providing legal aid, managing detention facilities, and conducting deportations runs into billions annually. Yet we're celebrating a policy achievement that affects 0.01% of the problem. It's rather like announcing victory over inflation after reducing it by 1,000th of a percentage point. What makes this situation particularly galling for anyone who believes in competent governance is that there are examples of countries that have successfully managed similar challenges. Australia's offshore processing model, whatever one thinks of its humanitarian implications, demonstrably reduced boat arrivals. Various European countries have implemented effective integration and processing systems. But Britain seems determined to avoid learning from either successful deterrent models or successful integration models, preferring instead to muddle through with policies that satisfy no one and achieve nothing. The security implications cannot be ignored either. Every irregular crossing represents a failure of border control. While the vast majority of channel crossers are genuine asylum seekers fleeing persecution, the inability to control who enters a country creates obvious vulnerabilities that serious states cannot simply ignore. Yet our response has been to celebrate moving 2 people to France while hundreds more arrive weekly through the same uncontrolled routes. Perhaps most frustrating for observers who remember when British politics was characterized by pragmatic problem-solving rather than performative gesturing, this entire episode represents everything wrong with contemporary political culture. Complex challenges are met with simplistic solutions. Massive problems are addressed with microscopic interventions. Success is measured by press releases rather than results. The Foreign Secretary's proud declaration that this policy provides immediate deterrent would be laughable if the underlying crisis weren't so serious. An immediate deterrent would presumably produce immediate results. Instead, we have immediate press conferences about minimal achievements while the fundamental problem continues unabated. It's governance by soundbite in an era that demands serious statecraft. Looking at the broader European context makes Britain's approach appear even more peculiar. While we celebrate deporting 2 people to France, other European countries are grappling with similar challenges through a combination of enhanced processing capabilities, improved integration systems, more effective deterrent measures, and genuine international cooperation. Britain, meanwhile, appears to have chosen the worst of all worlds: ineffective deterrence combined with inadequate processing systems and minimal integration support. The question facing any serious observer of British politics is whether this represents genuine incompetence or calculated political theatre. Perhaps it's both. Perhaps we've reached a point where the demands of 24-hour news cycles and social media politics make it impossible to implement long-term solutions to complex problems. Perhaps modern political culture rewards the appearance of action over actual effectiveness. But here's what should concern every British citizen regardless of their position on immigration. If our government cannot honestly assess and effectively address this relatively straightforward policy challenge, what confidence can we have in their ability to manage the genuinely complex issues facing the country? Climate change, economic competitiveness, technological disruption, geopolitical instability. These challenges make channel crossings look simple by comparison. The two-person deportation celebration represents something more troubling than policy failure. It represents a triumph of spin over substance in British governance. When ministers can stand before cameras and seriously present such minimal achievements as significant breakthroughs, we've crossed a line from political optimism into outright delusion. The gap between rhetoric and reality has become so vast that it threatens the basic functioning of democratic accountability. What's most maddening about this entire episode is that Britain possesses all the resources necessary to address irregular migration effectively. We have sophisticated legal systems, advanced technology, extensive international relationships, and considerable financial resources. What we lack is political leadership willing to acknowledge the scale of required interventions and implement policies proportionate to the challenge. Instead, we get theatre. We get press conferences about moving two people while hundreds arrive. We get tough rhetoric about breaking paradigms while the paradigms remain entirely intact. We get promises about growing deportation numbers that would need to increase by several thousand% to match arrival numbers. It's policymaking as performance art, and not particularly convincing performance art at that. The tragedy is that serious immigration policy requires serious political commitment over extended periods. It requires investment in processing systems, cooperation with international partners, genuine engagement with source countries, effective integration programs, and yes, robust enforcement measures. None of this can be achieved through theatrical gestures or celebratory press conferences about minimal achievements. As we watch this latest episode in Britain's ongoing immigration policy soap opera, the real question isn't whether deporting two people represents progress, it's whether our political system remains capable of addressing serious challenges with serious solutions. On current evidence, the answer appears to be a resounding no. So there we have it, Britain's latest immigration breakthrough: 2 deportations, hundreds of arrivals, and a government that genuinely seems to believe this represents success. It would be comedic if it weren't so tragic. It would be entertaining if it weren't so consequential. Instead, it's simply another reminder that in modern British politics, the gap between rhetoric and reality has become a chasm that threatens to swallow what remains of effective governance. The real deterrent effect of this policy isn't on migrants contemplating channel crossings. It's on citizens contemplating whether their government remains capable of serious statecraft. And frankly, that's a more worrying prospect by far. That's today's examination of Westminster's latest performance piece. If you found this analysis useful, make sure you're subscribed, because British politics continues to provide an endless supply of material that deserves serious scrutiny. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and remember that in politics, as in everything else, actions speak louder than press conferences.